In this podcast episode, Isabel Brown explores a wide range of cultural, social, and political issues particularly affecting Generation Z. The conversation covers topics like female looks maxing and its societal implications, mental health challenges among youth, the crisis of femininity and masculinity, evolving cultural values around family and marriage, the shifting political landscape of younger generations, healthcare systems in the US and the UK, and a surprising religious resurgence among young people. Throughout, Isabel offers reflections on the deeper cultural currents shaping these phenomena and highlights ongoing battles around identity, meaning, and societal cohesion. The episode begins with a detailed look at female looks maxing, a trend similar to what men have engaged in, but with uniquely intense and sometimes dangerous extremes for young women. On platforms like Reddit and Discord, teenage girls share strategies ranging from corset waist training and jaw sculpting with peanuts to using unregulated drugs for weight loss and breast enhancement. This culture encourages self-criticism and body modification at very young ages, sometimes starting as young as 13 or 14. Isabel points out the sad reality of these pressures, equating it to a broader societal failure on beauty standards and mental health. There is a tendency to erode the boundaries between what is ugly and beautiful, with often distorted ideals celebrated. The discussion also touches on the difference in perception and emotional reaction when female looks maxing is considered compared to male looks maxing, highlighting a protective instinct toward young girls who are disproportionately vulnerable to these cultural abuses. This segment delves into the cultural assault on traditional gender roles, both masculinity and femininity, and how they are being vilified or actively erased in modern society. While masculinity has long faced criticism and attempts to suppress it as toxic, Isabel emphasizes the even deeper and more sinister undermining of femininity. This is especially notable in how young women are encouraged to reject or outsource what has historically been unique to womanhood, such as intimacy, emotional fulfillment, and motherhood, in favor of corporate success, casual relationships, or technological substitutes like surrogacy, and even emerging pregnancy robots. She links this trend to broader societal narratives that devalue marriage, motherhood, and femininity itself. The conversation also touches on how this dynamic may worsen and eclipse the current well-documented crisis of masculinity. Isabel highlights the rising mental health crisis among youth, with particular attention to the pervasive use and consequences of SSRIs, antidepressants. She shares the story of a young woman prescribed SSRIs at age 7 and faced with years of dependency and severe side effects, including permanent sexual dysfunction. This is juxtaposed with societal blindness or silence on issues like post-SSRI sexual dysfunction, PSSD, reflecting pharmaceutical industry influence and media avoidance. The discussion critiques the mainstream medical and cultural systems that often push medication as a first response and the failure to adequately warn patients about withdrawal and long-term impacts. This section also draws parallels between overprescription of SSRIs and medical interventions related to youth gender transition, focusing on the societal willingness to medicate or alter the biology of vulnerable young people. A recurring theme throughout the podcast is the powerful role of social media and internet culture in shaping young people's beliefs, identities, and behaviors. The episode examines how mimetic behaviors, copying peers, dramatically influence everything from gender dysphoria clusters to fertility and parenting decisions. Isabel and her co-host discuss how the algorithmic bubbles of the internet create isolated realities that reinforce specific worldviews or behaviors, both positive and negative. This exacerbates cultural polarization and influences deeply personal life choices, especially for girls and young women who are more vulnerable to these emotional and social influences. Isabel passionately addresses the current demographic crises of low marriage rates and declining birth rates, pointing out that the replacement fertility rate has fallen below sustainable levels in much of the Western world. She highlights cultural forces that promote ideas hostile to family formation and motherhood, often labeling traditional family life as outdated or undesirable and encouraging extreme individualism. Referencing historic American Communist Party goals revealed decades ago, she situates current cultural shifts in a broader context of systemic attack on the family institution. Isabel stresses the importance of returning to values that honor marriage, childbearing, and family as foundational for societal stability and moral health, while critiquing narratives that depict these choices as regressive or oppressive for women. The episode offers reflections on the modern portrayal of marriage and family life versus career ambitions for women, accompanied by Isabel's personal experiences balancing a professional life with motherhood. There is an acknowledgement of societal messaging that women are often told they are incapable of having it all, or that pursuing family life will hamper their career success. Isabel challenges these notions, asserting that family life and motherhood can bring fulfillment and purpose unparalleled by career achievements alone. She also discusses cultural backlash when advocating for family values, noting the strong stigmatization against those who encourage young people to embrace marriage and children in today's feminist discourse. Sex and sexuality receive critical analysis, with Isabel discussing how modern sex education and media portrayals, such as those from influencers or TV shows like Euphoria, promote a narrative of sexual liberation divorced from traditional concepts of intimacy, sacredness, or long-term commitment. She critiques the treatment of sex as commodified or casual, noting conflicting messages where therapeutic language is mixed with impulsive decision-making in youth sexual behavior. The conversation explores the paradox of sex being simultaneously seen as a sacred union and a disposable transaction, often framing choice as the ultimate empowerment, even when it leads to harmful outcomes. Isabel examines surprising political trends among Generation Z, predicting and observing a conservative cultural turn driven by a desire for stability, tradition, and moral clarity. She describes how young people have begun to reject radical leftist ideologies in favor of questions rooted in marriage, family, faith, and national identity. Drawing on her work with Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA, she elaborates on how this generational conservatism is different from establishment republicanism, more culturally engaged, skeptical of mainstream media, and invested in reconnection with values underpinning Western civilization. The political realignments are complicated by gender divides, with young women currently showing more left-leaning tendencies, although this is seen as mutable based on cultural engagement. The episode compares the U.S. healthcare system with socialized models like the UK's NHS, highlighting their respective strengths and shortcomings. Isabel stresses that while emergency care in the U.S. is guaranteed regardless of ability to pay, the massive cost and lack of price transparency create barriers and financial hardships for many. In contrast, the NHS offers care free at the point of delivery, but often with long wait times and rationing of services, as exemplified by stories such as the tragic case of a disabled baby denied prolonged care. The conversation touches on Medicaid's challenges in the U.S., including fraud and inefficiency, while emphasizing the broader problem of healthcare affordability in capitalist contexts where the absence of true free markets and bureaucratic practices inflate prices. In contrast to earlier secular trends, the podcast highlights a remarkable religious resurgence among young adults, especially within Christianity. Isabel observes that Generation Z is returning to deeply traditional forms of worship, including Latin Mass Catholicism and Orthodoxy, which provide a sense of stability, transcendence, and meaning amid cultural chaos. She contrasts this with the prior, seeker-friendly church movement designed to attract millennials, offering contemporary music and casual formats, but perceived as diluting theological truth. The newfound enthusiasm for ancient rituals, constants, and a shared moral framework reflects young people's yearning for objective truth and community in a fragmented society. Movements like Pizza to Pews exemplify this trend by blending social bonding with renewed interest in faith. Throughout the discussion, Isabel critiques the media's polarized portrayal of cultural issues, including the marginalization of traditional family values and religion. She points out examples such as The View, aggressively attacking her pro-family message, while mainstream outlets worship contemporary sexual and gender norms. The episode also discusses the strategic deployment of progressive identities and weaponization of empathy as toxic empathy that can distort public discourse, ultimately creating division between young men and women. The evolving narratives around masculinity, femininity, abortion, and social roles are framed within a broader struggle over societal identity and the kind of legacy future generations will inherit. Isabel shares an optimistic view about the future, despite acknowledging profound cultural struggles. She believes young people's renewed focus on faith, family, and conservative values can lead to cultural revival and policy reforms that prioritize human dignity and flourishing. However, she stresses that this potential will only be realized if society actively rejects nihilism, radical individualism, and polarizing dogma in favor of truthful conversations rooted in empathy and mutual respect. The episode underscores the urgent need for young men and women to collaborate in protecting the foundations of civilization from corrosive cultural forces. Amid many themes, Isabel discusses the emerging role of masculine protective instincts as crucial for preserving women's well-being, family structures, and cultural values. She describes the frustration young men feel toward ineffective conservative leadership and their desire to take an active, offensive stance in defending tradition and providing meaningful support. The stereotype of toxic masculinity is challenged by presenting masculinity as essential for societal survival, particularly at this historical juncture, reinforcing the need for balanced and respectful gender relations geared toward mutual flourishing. The episode repeatedly references the power of mimetic behaviors, the idea that humans imitate the attitudes, emotions, and behaviors of those around them, and how this phenomenon shapes everything from gender identity trends to family formation and mental health patterns. Isabel explains how mimetic clusters can produce sudden waves of behavior, both harmful and beneficial, and discusses the social challenges posed by highly individualized digital environments where segmented feeds often amplify extremes. She explores the potential for positive mimetic influences, such as visible motherhood and community support, as a remedy for social fragmentation. Isabel critiques both the left and right in relation to their historical approach to supporting families, stressing the importance of policy and cultural environments that make childrearing affordable and desirable. She applauds gestures like generous maternity leave benefits introduced by conservative organizations, while highlighting the expense of childbirth in the U.S. and contrasting this against cultural narratives that discourage family growth. She calls for systemic changes that recognize family as a societal cornerstone rather than an economic burden, reflecting emerging bipartisan moves to boost family-friendly policies. Isabel challenges aspects of contemporary feminism that, in her view, undermine women by portraying them as weak, incapable, or ill-equipped for family life. She rejects the notion that motherhood and marriage are inherently oppressive to women, framing these roles as sources of power, fulfillment, and societal contribution. The discussion spotlights tensions between feminist rhetoric and the lived desires of many young women, suggesting that cultural narratives often misrepresent or marginalize natural inclinations toward nurturing and family building. A thread through the conversation is skepticism about mainstream and legacy media's representation of cultural issues, from looks maxing and feminism to religion and politics. Isabel observes that media often prioritize sensationalism or ideological agendas over balanced coverage, silencing alternative viewpoints, especially conservative or traditionalist voices. She emphasizes the importance of authentic storytelling, grassroots movements, and independent media platforms in reclaiming honest public conversations and shaping culture proactively rather than passively consuming distorted narratives. Isabel concludes with reflections on the centrality of objective truth, morality, and shared cultural foundations in maintaining a cohesive society. She argues that the departure from objective standards toward subjective truths has fragmented communities and led to widespread confusion about identity, purpose, and values. This philosophical underpinning connects many of the episode's topics, underscoring the call for renewed engagement with enduring moral truths embodied in faith, family, and community institutions to navigate contemporary challenges effectively.